The purpose of this research is to determine the impact of information and communication technologies in the informal economy, specifically to see if these technologies helps to alleviate the amount of people in the informal sector. This research is a collaboration with Jorge Andrés Vélez Ospina, who at the time was working at Universidad Católica in Colombia. So let's begin by looking at the extent of the problem. As you can see from this map, and darker means more, the amount of people engaged in the informal economy is very highly correlated with level of development. So not surprising, you have countries in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia that have high levels of informality. So why is it that we want to look at the informal sector? Well, first of all, because as you saw in the previous map, a great number of people work in this economy. And I guess to a certain extent, it is a reflection of the economic and political conditions of a country and a reflection of the inadequate institutional arrangements that prevail in these nations that are really not able to target poverty effectively. So let's define the informal economy, and the way we're going to do this is by doing it through a story, because I'm hoping that by understanding the story, you will be able to understand clearly what are the factors that contribute to this problem. So in this story, we have this character Juan, and Juan is a street vendor in Latin America and recently lost his job. And this hypothetical character now has to find a new job. So what is he to do? Well, without a lot of skills, it is easy to enter the informal economy. First of all, because it can easily accommodate a small one-person operation. You don't need to have a great number of people working with you to start this type of venture. In addition, you really don't need a lot of capital or equipment to enter the informal economy. In fact, all you need is a little bit of money to buy a few goods, for the most part pirated CDs and CVs and software and game, etc., which are the most common type of products sold by informal vendors. And then you don't really need a lot of skills. So for a person who has just lost his job, like in this case our character Juan, it's not easy to find another job if you do not have the level of education that might require to obtain a job offer in the formal economy. So the informal economy, and this is a very narrow definition, because if you start looking at the literature on the informal sector, you will see that there are many manifestations of the informal economy. But for the purpose of this paper, we define the informal economy or an informal sector as an enterprise that belongs to the informal sector when it is not registered under the legal frameworks associated with the operations of such entity. And this can involve registration of the entity, file of taxes, payment of social security, labor requirements, permits to operate, etc. So the problem with the informal economy is that they exacerbate economic problems in a country. Why? Because these entities do not pay taxes. And when an entity or multiple individuals do not pay taxes, it reduces the amount of resources available to government to be able to offer social services. Therefore, without support of the government to help alleviate basic needs, it gets further strained when there are not enough taxes. And I'll talk a little bit about another factor that the fact that they do not pay taxes contributes to the problem. We also find that these entities do not contribute to knowledge creation or capital. And this is because, as mentioned before, barriers to entry are very low, and they really do not need to invest and to be able to continue their operations. There is no, in fact, there is in these cases there are no buildings where they offer their services or their goods, and they having for the most part a lower level of education, they do not have any incentive to continue to pursue higher level of skills, primarily because, of course, the opportunity cost associated with investing in education when there are not really good prospects for advancing economically, doing something else. Now, one of the consequences of living under the informal sector is that there is very little potential to grow. And as I mentioned before, taxes is a contributing factor to remaining small, because if you grow, well, then you are more likely to be found to be operating illegally, and therefore you will be fined. So there's no incentive to grow because, of course, you don't want to be found and fined. In addition to the fact that these operations have been found to affect people's levels of poverty. So this study by Amuedo Dorantes found that female are, more likely to fall into poverty by 4%, and for male, falling further into poverty is 88%. So, as you can see, living in the informal economy does not actually help people to alleviate their problems with poverty. Now, the nature of this business is particularly difficult. So, if you think about a person like Juan who may want at some point be able to expand his operations because, let's say, he's doing okay, well, it is very hard for these individuals to access capital. And the main reason is because they do not have a record, they don't have a credit history. So any bank will be reluctant to offer them any type of loan. Now, in the case that they actually succeed in getting a loan, the rates that they pay are significantly higher than those that are paid by their formal counterparts. So an informal vendor is likely to be paying a 22 or higher interest rate compared to a person in the formal sector, where the average in developing countries is about 5%. And in fact, there are countries where the rates for people who are in the informal economy can be as high as 50 and 100%. These operations are also riskier, and the reason is because they do not have any protections. They cannot go to court when their goods are confiscated by police, and they cannot be protected from potentially abuses when anybody requests some sort of payment for them to operate, because they're not protected by the law, because they are really not operating within the law. So they are high risk operations. Having said that and explained why these entities enter the informal economy, the question is, why does this happen? What are the factors that lead to individuals like Juan getting into the informal economy? If you start looking at the literature, there are several factors that scholars have found to contribute to this phenomenon. First of all is bureaucracies, particularly burdensome bureaucracies. We all know that governments have a role in society. They are there to support people, to help people, to reduce market failure, to reduce unsafe working or sanitary conditions. So there's a role for government. However, in many countries, these entities have become so large and so inefficient and so burdensome that it's very difficult to register, for example, a business. Another factor is corruption. This is, within the context of an individual, let's say that our character wants to enter the formal sector because he's doing well in the informal sector, he's getting some money, and now he wants to perhaps begin a business selling, similar type of goods. Well, with large bureaucracies, there are also instances of corruption. So if you want to register your business, you might find that you have to pay multiple people to get the operation registered formally. And this is not only time consuming, but that increases the cost of registered a formal entity, and in addition to the fact that you're going to be paying along the way. Another factor that scholars have found to contribute to people entering the informal sector is the taxes. This study by Burgess in 1993 found that the taxes in developing economies are, about 17-18%, while in developed economies are 7.6%. And I guess this is not surprising, because if there are a large number of people who do not pay taxes because they are not formally registered business, the government needs to make up for those lost taxes by taxing those who pay higher. So there is, as I said, a negative effect on not only individual who enters this sector, but to the country as a whole. Now, in this paper, we want to see if information and communication technologies can help to alleviate this problem. And in this study, we look in particular to two technologies: mobile phones, particularly because they are such widespread acceptance of these technologies, and then we also look at broadband. Now, to be able to begin to explore this relationship, you can see here in this graph that the higher the number of subscribers to broadband, it appears that it reduces the informal sector as a percentage of GDP. But before we can explore this notion of information technologies, we have to take a little look at education. And the reason why education is important is because to be able to take advantage, particularly of technologies like broadband, there has to be a certain level of literacy. This graph represents the relationship between public spending on education and, again, the informal sector. And as you can see, it's not really clear. Once we have identified all the different factors that contribute to the informal economy, we set up this model, and this model uses multiple indicators, multiple causes, and a statistical analysis, because the informal economy is difficult to measure. And when we have an economy that cannot really be for which data cannot be collected, then you have to find it indirectly. And this is a method that other scholars have used to identify the size of the informal sector. This is a study of about 171 countries, and it goes from 2007 to 2014. So let's look at the impact of the different causes of the informal economy, and then the results that we found through the study. So let's look at the effect of education, whether or not education positively or negatively contributes to the informal economy. So we find that the more education you have, the more likely that you'll have an increase in the informal economy. Of course, this is a small impact, but it is actually to a certain extent surprising that you will have an increase in the informal economy. If you look at the literature on education in developing countries, you begin to find that there is, unfortunately, instances where people are getting educated, but they are unable to find jobs. So this, to a certain extent, might explain this positive relationship. And then, of course, we have to figure out what's the impact of bureaucracies, and this is, we use this proxy of the cost of starting a business, and we find that the impact is positive, meaning that the more it costs to enter a business from the perspective of complying with bureaucratic requirements, the more likely that you will enter the informal sector. And then we want to look at the impact of e-government, and this is a variable that we included later on, mainly because we wanted to see if making governments more efficient will reduce instances of corruption. Now, please keep in mind that this study is, years back, and e-government has not quite been adopted in many of these developing countries. Now, the results indicate that it affects the informal sector, but it appears that the more you increase, when you increase the e-government, it also increases the informal sector. And of course, this is counterintuitive, and we question why is this? And as I indicated, the years that we study are still early in the adoption of broadband of many of these economies, and there has to be a period of transition even when countries are adopting these technologies, there's much to be learned, and a lot of these procedures are not necessarily working perfectly. So we might be capturing this period of transition where governments are not fully implementing a broadband strategy, and people are not really fully satisfied with whatever limited offerings are there with digital governments. The tax revenue, which we found to be positive, shows that it does the higher the tax revenue, the more the instances of the informal economy. Corruption, as expected, has also a positive impact. And then, of course, the two variables of interest, which are mobile phones as well as broadband. And let's begin with mobile phones. This is perhaps surprising at first, because we did not expect that cell phones will contribute to the increase of the informal economy, but thinking about the results a little bit more, you will notice that mobile phones are coordination technologies, meaning that the main purpose of a mobile phone is to get organized with other people. And by organized, it could mean figure out, for example, whether or not, in the case of the informal vendor, whether or not you see a police coming over and you need to take your business out of the street. It could also be that you need to get some more of your goods and you need to call the supplier to be able to get more. Or it might be basically talking to other vendors to coordinate their activities. So the mobile phone itself does not offer many opportunities for people to then learn potentially more about their businesses, and potentially moving out of the informal sector. So then we have to look at broadband and see how broadband affects the informal economy. In this case, we find that broadband has a negative impact in the informal economy, and in this case, negative is a good thing because it reduces the size of the informal economy. And again, this is perhaps intuitive because people who have access to broadband also have access to computers, and a computer is a friendlier device to be able to look for information and potentially learn many of the skills that you need to start a business and make it grow and be successful in providing whatever service or the sale of goods that a person might choose. So the conclusion of this study is, as expected and found in the literature, burdens of bureaucracies, heavy taxation, and corruption contribute to the size of the informal sector, and of course will need to be addressed. The variables of interest, which are the information and communication technologies, have actually different roles, and specifically with respect to cell phones, which have been the technology of choice for many of these countries, contribute to the informal economy because it lowers the cost of coordination, making their operations more efficient. Broadband, on the other hand, we find has the capability to allow individuals to move from the informal to the formal sector, and we believe it is because a computer with greater speed has the ability to give individuals access to information and resources that can make it easier for them to go into the formal sector. The policy implications of this is therefore that governments should continue to invest in broadband, but also trying to make operations more business friendly that can make it easier for many of these individuals, especially when they begin to grow, to enter the formal sector much easier. And that's it. I hope that you enjoy the work done for this research.